Hi guys, nice to meet you. So if you've been in software development, chances are that you've done Agile, some sort of Agile. We usually start with Scrum, we have Kanban, we have Scrumban and all the other variations of it. And at some point, inevitably you have to scale, you have to do something else because Scrum is fine if you have a couple of teams, if you have 5 teams, maybe 10 teams, but at some point when you're working on really complex enterprise products, you need more collaborations. And then companies go to Scrum at scale, less, safe, and all the other approaches. And if you're working like me with external clients, at some point, inevitably, someone will say, let's try Spotify. And what you do at some point is that, let's try what? Because you know what the Spotify as a company is, but not many people have heard about the Spotify approach. And at that point, you would say, okay, let me assess the situation. And by assess, I mean Google it, understand what it means, and then try to say that it's not a good idea in most cases. So Spotify, it was founded in 2006. They have millions and millions of users. All of you guys here are probably using Spotify for like podcasts and listening to music. And it was an incredible success from the very beginning. Spotify is available in nearly every country around the globe. What they did in about 2012, they released a white paper that described their practices, or the so-called Spotify approach. And it was a success because people saw that company that grew significantly for 6 years, and they say, okay, it must be the practices that they're using. So I think in order to understand the approach and whether it works for your company, you have to know the basics and you have to know some of the pitfalls. Let's answer the question, does a Control-C, Control-V approach work? I wouldn't say so, because Spotify at that time, they were a startup. They were very innovative, they're working with the latest technology. They had all the foundations built to use this type of an approach. If you're a more advanced company, a company that has been around for several years, you have processes in place, you have like different security levels, probably just taking the approach and implementing it wouldn't be a good idea. But let's start with the model itself and the basics. And some of the examples I'm going to give are from a company, a startup company that wanted to implement the approach and why it worked for them, like in some aspects, and in some aspects it wasn't really successful, and how to tweak this to work for you. So the Spotify model, we have several layers of it. We have squads, we have chapters, guilds, and tribes, alliances as well. At the very basic level, we have the squad. The squad is like a typical Scrum team. It's like a mini startup, cross-functional, self-organized. You have less than 10 engineers. You want to make sure that you have a small enough group of people so they can collaborate. When we were doing the Spotify approach, it was all remote during COVID. And we have people from around 30 countries around the globe, so it was difficult to say the least. You have to make sure that people are talking. You have to give them all the tools, communication channels. You have to create the right environment. As Fabian mentioned, people have to talk to one another and exchange ideas. Each squad can define their own rules and what works best for them. Some can use Scrum, some can use Kanban, some can use Scrumban, waterfall, if you will. Let's not get carried away, but like any agile practice they can use. For my client at the time, we started with a basic Scrum. At some point, some of the infrastructure teams saw that Scrum is not working for them, that they have so many work that is coming ad hoc, that they can't really plan it. So they switched to Kanban. And then the other teams were, wait, what? We can do that? We can switch? And we had a few more teams that switched to Kanban. But you have to enable the teams. Like, yes, you can start with Scrum, give it a try, and at some point, if it's not working, change it. Make something that works for your team. And then we have the chapters, which is something that I particularly like. These are communities of practice. Let's say if in each squad you have, in each, if in each squad you have a couple of iOS developers, a couple of Android developers, a couple of QAs, and one backend developer. Of course, that backend developer is going to talk to the whole team and exchange ideas, but it's a whole different thing when you talk to somebody who has your background. So if we have 5 to 10 squads and we have one backend engineer in each of the squads, they're going to form such a community of practice, a chapter. A chapter is led by a chapter lead. The chapter lead is usually part of one of the squads. About 50% of their time is involved in actual coding. The other part is engaged in growing the chapter expertise, line management, helping the chapter members grow. The chapters would usually meet every couple of weeks. Like, there isn't a strict rule. In our case, it was every couple of weeks. They would have a separate Slack channel, and they would figure out what are the infrastructure's decisions that we want to make. How do we want to make commits? How many approvals we need per commit to be merged? And here's one of the first pitfalls. Like in many companies, who is the chapter lead, who is the boss? That's the most senior engineer. But many engineers don't want to have line management responsibilities, and they actually want to be solving technical solutions. Around 6 months into the project, they realized that that was an issue, and they, like all of the chapter leads, they had to reconfirm whether they wanted to have that position, or they had to hire externally, or like internally if somebody had the desire to be in that position. So that's something you should consider from my experience. The next level is we have tribes. So that is when you have a group of squads that are working closely together, maybe on a particular feature. Usually each squad would have a feature dedicated to them. Somebody might be working on payments, creating playlists, account features, profile features, etc. But when you have a bigger feature that has to be developed, you would create these tribes. What I would suggest is not starting like having in place all of these structures, because unlike other models, you don't have an implementation guide. Nobody tells you how to start doing Spotify. Like, you don't have a step 1, step 2, step 3. You have to figure it out on your own if you like the idea. For the company I was working with, they started just with squads and chapters and guilds. And about a year and a half into the product development, they decided that it's time to design the tribes. What you have to be careful about is that you still want the squads to be independent, meaning that you shouldn't have too many cross-functional dependencies. Of course, you cannot avoid dependencies at all. You're going to have them, but you should make sure that the teams are not blocking each other all of the time. And we have the guilds here. The guild is an interesting, like, it's similar to the chapter in a way that it's formed around like a community, a topic. But if in a chapter you have backend developers, front-end developers, DevSecOps, and QAs, in a guild you can have anybody who has interest in that topic. So let's say we have an agile guild. If you're not happy with the agile processes or you want to contribute to the agile practices, you can join an agile guild where you might have scrum masters, agile coaches, product managers, QAs, like everybody who is interested can contribute to this guild. We have two roles that are more distinct in the model when we have chief architect and system owner. The chief architect is responsible for the overall architectural decisions. In the case of my client, they had a group of people responsible for that, and they were working closely with the chapter leads. Yes, it's a very flat hierarchy, but the idea was that the chapter leads, they're representing the chapter, so they're already talking to everybody, and they can represent them on this forum. And then we have system owners, something that was being implemented at that company at the time, but we had it in a previous company. We call them repo owners in that case. So we'll have a repository, and we have one person who is not necessarily reviewing and approving every pull request, but looking for the overall health of that system, making sure that, that it's fine. And on a bigger level, we have tribes forming an alliance. Now, where the Spotify approach started, don't think that like in many other frameworks, just somebody wrote it down, figured it's good, and like let's implement it everywhere. It started one by one. So they started implementing the first thing. They started with Scrum. It was working up to a certain point, but the company grew substantially. At some point, they were having like hundreds of developers. For instance, for a tribe, the number of people, like ultimate number of people in a tribe is between 100 and 150 developers. That is massive effort to align all of these people together. So alliance, it goes way more than that. If you consider that you have 100 or 150 people per tribe, that is about 300 people. So you shouldn't really scale unless you have the capacity for that. And there is a nice video on the Spotify approach, and these are some screenshots from that video. Some of the engineering practices that any company can implement from the Spotify model. Small and frequent releases. Releasing shouldn't be difficult. It shouldn't be something that is cumbersome, that is taking a lot of effort. I've once worked with a client, their release process was a month to do everything, a month. Like you have 2-week sprints, but you release every month because of all of the things that were happening in the background. That shouldn't be the case. It should be very easy. It should be something you can do daily. You have decoupled releases. Don't get me wrong, Spotify started with a big monolith system in the very beginning, but as they grew, they realized that that's not the way to go. You can't, like every time you want to release, you have to deploy the whole system. It wasn't effective. So they had these decoupled releases. You can release a subset of the system, just like the playlist or the account update. And then you have a very self-managed model. So you have client app squads, squads that are going to help the feature squads, like squad that is going to help with iOS or Android development, and we have infrastructure squads. The idea of the infrastructure squads was not to do the whole job of the squads, of the feature squads. It was to enable them, to give them the tool, the best practices, to advise them on how to deploy better. The other idea they have is limited blast radius. So make sure that if something fails, the whole system is not down. You have just a piece of it that is not working. Like, yes, it's a big deal, but it's one piece. The system is overall working. And they had also limited releases. So you want to test something, you can release it to live audience. Instead of having people come for some type of testing and user feedback at the office, you just release it, but to a very small subset of people. And if you see it like, for one user there, it's not working, or he's not happy, but that's one user. Overall, like you have millions of users. The other thing is that they had the option to test live. So you have a great idea, you have a few days to develop it, you can ship it to production, you can get feedback. If the user loves it, go ahead, we can develop it, we can invest more effort into developing it. If they don't like it, great, we can do something else. But the engineers had this in their hands, they had the innovation. For release management, they had release trains and feature toggles. So if the first train leaves in a week or 2 weeks, we have feature A, B, C, and a bit of feature D. A, B, C are done feature B is started. Instead of cherry picking the code and making it all difficult, you ship everything to production and you just turn off the toggle so it's not visible to the user, but you can see if you have any integration issues. Then you have the next release, you have E, D is now done, F is nearly done but not done, like it's not production ready. You're still going to ship it, see what the issues are, and turn it on when it's done. In scale events, this is not something that is from that white paper necessarily, but it's something that I've seen in practice being used when you have like the Spotify model or any other scaled agile model. You have to create a platform where all of these teams can align. You don't want to create silos because we said that every squad is a mini startup, which is awesome, but you create a ground for possibly this team working on that feature only and not caring about anything else. Yes, you have the chapters which should prevent that, but in the very beginning, especially if you're doing this in a remote environment, it's going to be difficult. Like you have to create that form. The first scaled event that we had with that client, all remote, 150 people from C-level executives right to the developers in a meeting together, and I remember vividly like walking into that Zoom room and thinking, God, this is the most expensive meeting ever. However, it is a 2-day event, so by the end of the second day I realized that it was really useful. Why I'm saying this, not because I was an agile coach there. I was seeing things from my perspective, from my team. Our backlog was clean. We had clear idea of what we are going to do. If we had dependencies with other teams, we would have these conversations, not with the entire team, but like different people from that team. And it makes sense for us. But when we were on that forum, I realized that that's not the case for a lot of teams, that they were not seeing the bigger picture and they were working just on their tiny piece. And as Fabian said, it's all about the product. Like you don't want to end up with a Frankenstein of a product. You want to have something cohesive, a good user experience, and for that you need all of the people to work together. So we start as a vision where we want to go, and that's why we have C-level executives at that meeting or somebody who can convey that vision. Like, this is the desired state, this is where we're going, go figure out how to get there. We start with the vision. It might be OKRs or like just the vision statement. And then on the first day, the first half of the day, we have briefings. And that's again to ensure alignment. We have briefings from the chief architect. What is the state of the architecture? What are the different tools that we are using or considering to be using? What is our plan for the next 3 months? And by plan, I don't mean like waterfall Microsoft project plan. I mean roughly what we want to achieve. Then we have statement from the chapter leads, what is the state of each chapter, from the product managers, what are the features that we believe we should be focusing in the next 3 months, again a very short period of time. And at the end of that, the second half of the day, in our case virtually, we had breakout rooms in Zoom. Every team would have their breakout room and you can jump to other breakout rooms. So you have some time to figure out, okay, 3 months is probably about 6 sprints, what we want to do in these 6 sprints. Not what you want to do in terms of specific Jira tickets, just overall. This sprint, we think we should focus on like user experience. The next sprint, we are focusing on account features or whatever. You build that plan roughly, in our case, in a Miro board, so it's visible to everybody. And then you start hopping around and talking to other people, because inevitably your work is going to block somebody and you need to know and you have to reprioritize. If you're doing something in sprint 5 because it's not that important to you, but you realize that there is another team whose whole work is depending on that feature, then you can move it forward. And that type of alignment is so valuable when working even on site. Like imagine 150 people, not everybody is going to be talking to everybody. So we have that at the end of the first day. And something very important, so we have the objectives, like what we want to achieve. We have here the different, do you see that? Yes. You have the different sprints and like a sticky note. We want to do this, we want to do that. We have threads for the different dependencies, so you can visibly see what this map is going to give you for our product development. We saw that we had a lot of dependencies on infrastructure, so we focused really like for at least 6 months into enabling the infrastructure teams to deliver all of the key features so we can unblock everybody. At the end of our first day, we do a confidence vote. Everybody votes from 1 to 5 whether they think that this thing is going to actually be shipped. Usually what you can see in the first day, like first planning first day, people are very confused. Nobody believes that this is happening. So you can expect between 1 and 3, it would be fine. But you don't just vote. People share concerns. And it is very empowering when engineers and chief executive officer are in the same space and everybody can bring like, see, this is an issue. And you have the decision makers in the room. Of course, you can make lower level decisions, but let's be honest, in most cases, you need management approval at some point. So you have these people and they listen to the actual problems. On the second day, we have the overall plan that is finalized. So first we had a confidence vote, we've raised the issues, then we have the second half of the first day of the second day to review all of the issues, maybe rework the plan, then we present the plan. We have a space that is dedicated for risks, but we don't necessarily work out all of the risks in that space. We just raise them and we make sure that each risk has an owner, somebody to follow up, make sure that this is done. And very important, we did a showcase every month and a half. What is a showcase? You know, at the end of the sprint, you have a sprint review where you demonstrate what you've built. But you demonstrate this, you demonstrate your increment, your feature, and of course it's working, like you've made sure that it's working. But what happens for the whole product? In the showcase, we had a working flow. So how a user logs in, goes to this feature and that feature, and how it interacts with the whole application. And that was again to make sure that we are not working in silos, that you're not saying it works on my machine, my feature is good, like I don't care about the product. It was to ensure that everything is smooth for the user. The model is very culture driven. I would often get the question whether it is a culture or a framework. Kind of both. I wouldn't really say that it is a framework. But for me personally, for something to be a framework, like I don't want to say that you need to have a certificate for it, but like when you have a certificate, let's say in whatever field, whatever technology, it means that you have standardization, you have proper rules. It means that if you have the certificate and you have the certificate, you have the same knowledge. Like the foundation is there. And you don't have that for Spotify. One of the most overlooked sentences in that white paper is that if you go and Google the Spotify model, you'll see like, oh, that's so outdated and they're not using that anymore. In that white paper, just at the very end, they say, by the time you're reading this, things are probably changed. We're doing something else because it's an evolving type of a framework. Like they see what works, what doesn't work, and they scale and they move and they change, and that's fine. I like the white paper because it gives you a foundation. And then on the internet, people would share their different stories and different approaches, and you can see what works for you. But yes, it is very culture driven. You have to allow people to make these decisions. You have to have autonomous teams. You shouldn't have too many formal processes. Of course, in many different environments, you might need formal processes, especially if you're working in a more regulated environment, and that is fine. But at the bottom, that you should have people who are encouraged to make decisions. More autonomy, less top-down management. You should give them space to innovate, to try things out. Value over business, meaning that we want to focus on what is valuable for the customer and how to enhance the customer experience. Minimize dependencies, which is one of the most difficult things to do, but you have to be very mindful on how you divide the squads and how the work is distributed. Productivity is effort, competence, environment, and motivation. There is an email that probably most of you have seen from Spotify. It's something along the way of they had a regular survey of all of the employees, a satisfaction survey, and it was like, thank you for filling out the survey. We had 98% happy employees, but that's not good enough. Like, we invite all of these, like 2% people that are not happy, please come to us and help us improve. So that says a lot about their culture. And that's not something that you have in many companies. Defining what awesome looks like, one of my most favorite things, they don't have definition of done already, they have definition of awesome, what's cool, what the user is going to like. And the Spotify health check. In our case, it was every quarter, we would have this approach. So we have teams answer a set of questions. And these are the questions. We have teamwork. Do we like working together? Sponsor players, do we believe that we rule the game or we are being told what to do? Mission, do we know what we are actually building here? Code-based health, is it good? Like, is it difficult to work with that code base? What is the speed of our delivery? Is it easy to release or is it a pain? Are we learning anything? Are we using the best technology? What do we get out of this? Are we delivering value? Do we believe that we are delivering value? Do we have suitable processes like Scrum, Kanban, or whatever? And is it fun to work here? And you have like red, amber, green, and you can compare this with the team every few months and between teams, just to get an idea of what are the most common issues. And as Fabian mentioned, like, what are these small improvements you can make that are going to reflect on the overall satisfaction? So should you try it? Don't copy the model. Tailor it to your environment. Make sure that you take it into consideration. What works for you now and what is the end goal of the company? Put an emphasis on trust and building relationships, because this is how you're going to change the culture. Empower people and teams. If you're in a very regulated environment, in the beginning it's going to be like stressful for people to actually make decisions. But over time it's going to get easier and they're going to enjoy it. Experiment and test what actually works. And expect mistakes, because they're going to happen anyway. And if you have time for any questions. Yes. I can hear you at least.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions, but I would suggest...
Meet me in the break.
Exactly. Find Vili in the break, either now or in the lunch, or even better, suggest it as an open space and get it discussed thoroughly. So,
Perfect.
big round of applause, please.
Thank you.